It's spooky month, everybody, and I figured what better way to celebrate it than by making a top 5 about the nightmare creatures that inhabit the world of Remnant, known as the Grimm. So without further ado, Weegee here, and let's talk about which Grimm give me the absolute heebie-jeebies. Oh, and one last thing, due to the complex nature of the Hound, being both a Grimm and a person technically, it will not be included on this list. Number 5. At number 5 we have the Geist. The Geist is a possession type Grimm that the characters of RWBY encounter often enough in the show, at least once per arc. They are characterized by their ability to possess a variety of things from knight armor like we see with Weiss's Armagigas, to giant boulders like we see in the season premiere of Volume 4. This ability makes them one of the more versatile Grimm in this show. It's this versatility that makes them one of my favorite Grimms, as based on what they possess, it can pose a completely different threat, and have completely different capabilities. When it possesses a suit of armor and becomes the Armagigas, it is surprisingly quick, and has the ability to wield a blade with alarming skill. But when it possesses something like that, it doesn't have the best defense, unlike if it were to say possess a bunch of large boulders, where it's slow but harder to take down, because well, it's solid rock, which we saw in the first episode of Volume 4. Or it can even possess some ice that has some volatile dust crystals in it, forcing the hunters and huntresses to devise a plan that kills the Grimm without causing the dust to explode like in Volume 7. The possibilities that lie within the Geist are what makes it a really cool Grimm, and one of my favorites. It can create some very unique combat encounters that I hope they explore more in the volumes to come. And if the show were to ever get like an open world kind of game, I could see these being a really cool enemy to fight. Though this ability isn't without its drawbacks, as it requires something strong to possess, and the Grimm is defenseless in its normal form. Design-wise, this enemy is also a bit boring in its base form, just being like a shadowy ghost thing, and even when it has possessed something, it's not that inspired, usually just looking like a golem made of different components, the only exception being the Armagigas, which looks kick-ass. I love the medieval design that it has. It also doesn't help that it is technically the main summon of the best character in the show, Weiss. Number 4. The Knuckleheave will probably stand out quite a bit from the other Grimm on this list, as its main draw for me comes less from its abilities and more from its appearance. The Knuckleheave looks absolutely wicked, like you stuck an apathy Grimm on top of a horse. The way its arms dangle down almost dragging along the ground and the way that its body contorts right before it attacks are frightening. It bears a similar but weaker ability to that of the apathy as well, with the Knuckleheave being able to let out a large screech that disorients its prey. It also bears a similar, but weaker ability to that of the apathy, with the Knuckleheave being able to let out a loud screech that disorients its prey. But its arms are a lot deadlier than that of the apathy, easily being able to swat Team Ranger to the side. They also have a far longer reach. The horse part doesn't really do much for its abilities outside of being a way to move quicker, and probably to stomp people, but it does add to the horrifying nature of this Grimm. The second reason for my love of this Grimm is its involvement in Ren and Nora's backstory. Having a special kind of Grimm being tied into the history of some of the characters is a cool idea, and helped emphasize that the Grimm are a danger to the greater world of Remnant outside of the kingdoms. It also made for one really emotional moment as Ren finally gets revenge on the creature that killed his family and destroyed his village. It also gave us something that up to this point we've never seen, an angry and irrational Ren. So yeah, its blood-curdling appearance and story significance land the Knuckleheave as my 4th favorite Grimm. Number 3. At number 3 we have the most recent Grimm introduced into the world of Remnant, that was featured in the recently finished show, RWBY's Queendom. I honestly might have put this one further up, but I wanted to avoid recency bias. My love for the Nightmare Grimm comes from a few things. The biggest one being the opportunities this Grimm creates for character development. Trapping the user in their own mind in a world that was created from their memories and their fears, and then forcing them to come face to face with these fears and insecurities or die is an incredibly unique way to explore the depths of a character's personality as well as showcase their history. And it makes a good way to show a character's development. In Ice Queendom, we saw Weiss have to overcome her prejudice against the Faunus and accept the change that she was going through despite what it meant for her relationship with her family. But it's not just a way to develop a character personally. It's also a great way to develop characters' relationships with each other, as the only way to kill the Grimm is to send close friends into the infected person's dream world. When in said world, the people will be affected by the dreamer's perception of them, giving us insight into what the dreamer thinks of them. The final reason I love this Grimm is its ability to trap people in their own mind, which I talked a little bit about. The ability to use somebody's out of control emotions and insecurities to possess them is as fascinating as it is terrifying. Though it does have one possible major downside that they don't really talk about in the show, which is if it were to possess somebody without major self-doubts, or just somebody with very good control over their emotions, say someone like Tortrick or Coco. I feel like the Grimm wouldn't be able to do much to them, as it wouldn't have anything to feed off of to create its world. Speaking of that though, the actual worlds themselves are another outlet for some super creative character exploration. After all, these worlds are manifestations of the user's minds and heart. With Weiss, we saw that she created an empire for her and her friends just like her grandfather had told her to. It's also a license to print money, as in these worlds the characters are wearing alternate outfits. And we already see them doing this as they are making Figmas for the Ice Queendom designs. Imagine the amount of alternate styles you can get if you were to explore other people's minds. After all, the designs of the characters are all up to the way they are viewed by the dreamer. Much like the Geist, the overall design of the Nightmare isn't all that interesting, but it's still a little better than the Geist. Number 2. At number 2, we have another possession type Grimm. Though unlike the other two, this one is quite a bit more deadly. So much so that they created a whole fairy tale in universe about it to teach children not to run off on their own into dark areas. The Grimm I'm talking about is of course the Chill from the Grimm Fairy Tales book and anime. This Grimm is one of my favorite for two reasons. The short that it was introduced in, which is one of my favorite RWBY spin-off episodes that Roosterteeth has made, and 2, for just how absolutely terrifying this Grimm and its ability is. Well, let's start with the short it's introduced in. I loved the animation style that they used for this episode, and the presentation that they had for it. It gave off very much a horror movie vibes. I think both of those helped add to the horrifying nature of this Grimm. But what makes this thing so scary is its ability. Unlike, say, something like the Geist that can possess inanimate objects, the Chill can infect humans and faunas, hollowing them out and moving around their bodies. And unlike the Nightmare Grimm, they are much more deadly, killing the host in minutes, before they have to jump to another host, or I guess to the ground. It's not very clear what happens to them if they jump and there's nothing there. And while the person can be saved, it has to be done essentially as soon as the Grimm leaves the body. While possessed, the person is indecipherable from their normal appearance. The only way to really tell they are possessed is by their lack of ability to talk, as they can only repeat the victim's last words, which could be horrifying. Like, what if the person's last words were just help? So you just have this person mumbling help as they slowly shuffle towards you. Any decent person is probably going to see what is wrong with them, and then boom, they are possessed, and the Grimm has 2 victims. Though this Grimm isn't without its drawbacks, it can only exist in shadowy areas, hence the need to possess people. It can only possess them for a few minutes, so if they happen to possess somebody and then there is nobody else around, well, then that's it for them. Much like the 2 above it, the design is nothing to write home about, mostly because the Chill doesn't have a physical form at all. It exists purely in the shadows, which just adds to the horror of this Grimm, because that means there is no way to prevent it from possessing you, as you can't see it coming. Makes sense why they use this to scare the shit out of children. On the wiki it says that its ability to possess a person for only a few minutes would make it unlikely to be able to do what it did in the fairy tale. But I disagree. If the houses are close enough together and the town doesn't have many people, the Grimm could easily sweep through it pretty well. The sheer deadliness and terrifying nature of its ability are what make the Chill my second favorite Grimm in the RWBY universe. This horrifying nature is something it shares with my favorite Grimm. Number 1. By now you've probably noticed that when it comes to my favorite Grimm, it has less to do with their outward appearance and a lot more to do with their abilities and kinda how scary they are. And that's because the creatures of Grimm are supposed to be this force that humans fear. They are this over-looming threat, so naturally the cooler ones are the ones that invoke some sort of fear into the viewer. It's hard to do that with physical strength like the Beowulf, as they require a more personal look, but with abilities like these, it's easier for a person to imagine. This trend doesn't change from my favorite Grimm, which I'll get into now. What if you took a zombie but gave them the ability to drain the will to live out of a person? Well, then you would get my favorite Grimm in RWBY, the Apathy. The Apathy's first appearance is in Volume 6, in some of my favorite episodes of RWBY. The way they built up the reveal of the Grimm, dropping hints of what was going on through the 2 episodes, made me wish that we could have spent more time in this village, especially given what the latter half of the season entailed. Much like the Chill short, these 2 episodes had this very horror thriller movie vibe to them, with our heroes trying to figure out what happened to the people in this village, as they are all dead in their beds, like they just decided not to wake up one day. I mean, that moment in the episode when Weiss finds the dead bodies in the bed was legitimately horrifying. And I'm not a huge fan of horror, but That said, I do like the occasional drop of horror in my anime and video games. I feel like horror is better that way. It's better when you don't expect it. That's enough about the episode though, let's talk about the Grimm itself. The Apathy Grimm, like I said, is similar to a zombie, but with a special ability. An ability that legitimately scares me. It drains a person's will to live, draining them of their emotions and desires. Before long, they no longer have the drive to do anything. While we never see how the Grimm kill people on screen, according to Connor Picken, in the director's commentary for Volume 6, it's hinted at in the pose of the dead huntsman in Episode 6. If we look at the huntsman, we see a skeleton sitting against a broken wall. There is no visible damage to any of his clothes, no cuts, no frays, only wear and tear from time. Nor is there any dried blood near him. It's like he just laid there and died. Like the apathy drained him of everything, until all he could do is wait for himself to slowly succumb to hunger and thirst. Something like this is infinitely more scary to me than something like the pale wolves, or the manticore, or even the giant elephant, because while yes, those are big and scary, if you're well trained, you have a chance against them. With something like the apathy, if you run into a large group of them, it doesn't matter how well trained you are, if you are stripped of your will to do anything. It also plays off one of my biggest fears, which is a lack of control over one's own mind. So yeah, this Grimm by far is the most frightening one to me. Next, let's talk about the appearance of the apathy. Unlike the previous two, which while their abilities were interesting, they lacked presence, the apathy doesn't. Its appearance more than matches its ability. This thing is frightening looking. From its incredibly long arms to the way its body kind of slumps as it shuffles towards you, slowly as it drains your will to live. Its gangly and tall form add to its frightening visage. All of this comes together to create what I think is the most nightmare-inducing and overall best Grimm in the show. And those are my top 5 Grimm and RWBY. What do you think? If not, tell me what your favorite Grimms are in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and consider subscribing. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Weegee out.